Hey everybody, it's Dana Shay and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to share a video with you about why did this affair happen. Maybe you've gone through an affair in your life and you are sitting there thinking, how in the world did this happen to me? Today's video is going to give you 5 common reasons why affairs happen, and then I'm going to help you with some next steps to do if this has happened to you. And so I'm going to just start off by telling you I absolutely believe that every affair has a reason. Now, there is a big difference between a reason and an excuse, and we're going to differentiate that right now, because if you are thinking, okay, maybe I wasn't good enough, or maybe I wasn't doing enough, that's an excuse. And that is often what the unfaithful spouse will do. They will try to come up with an excuse to explain their behavior. So yes, there are valid reasons for why these things happen, but there are never an excuse, because at the end of the day, infidelity is always a choice. No one just wakes up in bed with someone and says, oh my gosh, how did I get here? Even if you were drunk, guess what? Getting drunk is still a choice. Now, if you were drugged and you had absolutely no control, that's a different situation. And I think those situations are probably less than 0.00000%. Okay. The majority of people who end up in affairs are making a willful choice. And I know that that's hard for some people to hear, especially if you are the spouse who has betrayed your spouse. You're thinking, no, I didn't make a choice. I didn't want to hurt them. I love my spouse. I would never want to hurt them. But the truth of the matter is, infidelity is always a choice. So we're going to talk today about why did this happen. I do believe that there are 5 common reasons for affairs. Now, there's probably many more, but for the sake of this podcast, we're going to talk about 5 common reasons why affairs happen. The first reason is because of emotional disconnection. If there is one thing that I teach and preach on, it is connection, connection, connection. If you've listened to the podcast, you know that you have heard me talk to you about taking my partner quiz. How connected of a partner are you? The reason for that quiz is because oftentimes we are very disconnected in our marriages and we have no idea. We are just going along, going through the motions, living life, taking care of kids, raising a family, paying bills, and we don't realize that in the hustle and bustle of life, it causes a disconnection. Now, a lot of spouses go through seasons of disconnection and you just reconnect, right? You realize, okay, we're distant, let's get back on track. We haven't had date night in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 months, let's get back on track. However, there are other times in marriages where spouses don't get back on track. They just continue to let the disconnect build and build and fester until now there's complete disconnection. And disconnection doesn't always look like animosity or aggression. You can be disconnected from your spouse and still get along. But the reason that some affairs happen is because of this emotional disconnection. A lot of physical affairs first start off by being emotional affairs. What does that mean? That means that most men, and I'm going to use men in this case, if the man is the perpetrator or the one who has been unfaithful, they don't just go to work and pick out a woman from the cubicles and say, come on, let's go sleep together. That's not how it happens. No, they develop some sort of relationship. They start opening up about their life to this woman at work. They start to talk about their feelings. They start to say things to this woman that maybe they don't feel like they can share with their spouse. Maybe they don't feel like they can be as open or honest with their spouse, but they can be that way with this other person. And so now there's a connection that's forged in this new relationship that leads to a physical affair. So emotional disconnection is something that we have got to be aware of. I'm always watching in my own marriage. How are we doing? Just this very morning, Sean and I had some couple intimacy time this morning. Okay. And then afterwards, we laid in the bed and talked, because that is important to us. It's important that we stay physically intimate, but that we also stay emotionally intimate, because that's going to help you. Now, it's not going to be like a fail-proof reason, right? It's not going to be a fail-proof guarantee, if you will, that your marriage isn't going to end up in infidelity, but it is absolutely a really good hindrance for infidelity to happen. Okay, so the first thing is emotional disconnection. The second reason that I believe that infidelity happens is because of unresolved personal issues. This is why I stress premarital counseling. I have told you before, if you listen to the show, I will not marry, I'm an ordained pastor, I will not marry a couple who has not gone through premarital counseling. Why? Because there is way too many issues that we deal with personally. There is way too much baggage that people go through than to be joining your life to somebody else's and not have dealt with your personal issues. All of us have experienced some sort of dysfunction in our lives, even if you grew up in a great family. There's still some level of baggage that you have. And if you're unaware of those things, then what's going to happen is you're going to get married. Your spouse will trigger those things. That's just how life works. And if those issues are not resolved, let's say, for example, someone has a deep-seated insecurity. They're not just unsure about themselves every now and again. No, this is like a deep-seated stronghold in their life. Well, they get married, and let's say their spouse doesn't affirm them. Their spouse doesn't meet all of their needs. What do you think is going to happen? They are going to turn outside of their spouse in some situations and get that need met because they never dealt with the insecurity that was in them in the beginning. So you need to know your own insecurities, your own issues, your own personal conflicts, and you absolutely need to know your spouses, and they need to know them. Because this is one of those wide open doors that we leave our marriage vulnerable in when we do not address our own personal issues. So do your own work. Work out your own situations before you get married. Now, obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you're already married. And maybe you can identify with, yep, my spouse didn't address his or her own issues, and now that has led to the situation that we're in. The third reason that I believe that some affairs happen is because of just simple opportunity. The opportunity was there, and the couple did not have good boundaries, or the spouse who was unfaithful did not have good boundaries. I talk about boundaries a lot because boundaries are your line of defense. Boundaries are going to help you from wiling out when you want to wile out. If you don't have boundaries in your marriage, you are absolutely leaving your marriage completely open to attack, to invasion. So in episode, I believe it was 49, I talk about 5 boundaries that every marriage needs. I'll be sure to link to that in the show notes. Be sure to listen to that. Boundaries are not just for people who have relationship problems. Every relationship needs boundaries. And if you can't identify what the boundaries are in your marriage, it's likely that you don't have any. And it's also likely that you or your spouse are not abiding by them. So, yes, there's going to be opportunity. There are beautiful people out here everywhere. There are people who are willing to listen to your problems out here everywhere. There are people that you can connect with and you can be friends with out here everywhere. Opportunities are always going to be there. Temptation is going to be there. But we have got to be people who say, you know what, even if the opportunity presents itself, even if I have the ability to have an affair, I have these boundaries that are going to protect me from myself. Sometimes it's not even about us being protected from other people. Sometimes we just need to be protected from our own selves. So if you don't have those boundaries, you need to get them. The fourth reason, and this is a really big one, this is probably one of the most common reasons other than emotional disconnection, why people have affairs is because of unmet needs. Unmet needs. Again, I feel like a broken record. Whenever I talk to premarital clients, I am always talking to them about your needs and your expectations. Because if we don't know that we have these needs, we're not going to communicate our needs to our spouse. Or if we have communicated our needs to our spouse and our spouse does not meet them, we are susceptible to an affair. Now, you don't have to have an affair. You can say, you know what? I understand that my spouse is not God. They can't meet all my needs. They're going to fail me sometimes. They're going to get it wrong sometimes. I'm still going to be a man or a woman of integrity, and I am not going to be unfaithful in my marriage. You could make that choice, but not everybody makes that choice. Some people choose to have an affair because they feel that their needs are that important that they have to betray their spouse to get their needs met. Friend, that is called selfishness. I'm sorry, I don't know how any way else to say it. That is called selfishness. Whenever you prioritize your own needs to the detriment and the harm of your spouse, that's absolute selfishness. And then the fifth and final reason for the sake of this episode is personal crises. Now, there are times in marriage that we go through crises, right? There's a loss, a death in the family, maybe an illness, maybe your spouse gets breast cancer and you just can't deal with it, or you get some sort of illness and you don't know what to do, and that causes you to make a horrible decision in a state of crisis. These situations, again, it's not an excuse, but I think these situations are easier to forgive because it's almost like you had a lapse of judgment. You went out of your mind for a second there. So even though it's not right, and again, there's no excuse, no valid excuse for an affair, this is one of those situations where you could probably explain, because I was on medication for depression and we were also disconnected, I opened myself up to this situation that I would not have done had those other factors not been present. And now I'm going to help you understand, what do we do next? So I realize that, yeah, I can relate to that. Maybe you can relate to more than one of those reasons. Maybe you've not had this conversation yet with your spouse because this is still so fresh and you're wondering, why did this happen? I really want to encourage you to get a valid reason, not an excuse, from them. Because it's one thing for me to tell you this is probably why your spouse was unfaithful, but it's another thing for you to ask them and for them to be honest enough to say why they were unfaithful. I can tell you that in my own marriage, for sure, I had a lot of these reasons. There was absolutely unresolved personal issues. I was 18 years old when I got married. I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't know my weaknesses. I didn't know my flaws. I didn't know the things that would trigger me. I wasn't emotionally aware or mature. There were a lot of issues personally that I was dealing with. Another issue was that Sean and I were absolutely disconnected. We were young parents. We had a 6-week-old baby when we got married, and there was just not enough time. He was working full-time days. I was working full-time nights. And then for a season we switched, and I was working mornings and he was working nights. And we were like two ships passing in the night. And not only did we not have time together, but we didn't connect. We were literally like roommates. You know, I could also say that there were unmet needs. I mean, there were so many of these things going on in our marriage that made this unfortunate recipe for our marriage to be vulnerable. Now, I want to keep saying that word vulnerable because these reasons are not excuses. They're not like, okay, see, she said it. She said because we were disconnected, that's why. No, that just simply means that your marriage was open. It was vulnerable to an attack. But again, infidelity is what? It's a choice. So we chose this and we have to own it. We have to take responsibility for it. So one thing that some people might want to know is, does this mean that my spouse didn't love me? If he or she cheated on me, did it mean that they never loved me? Were they just playing games with me? Some people will even say, like, why did you even marry me if you knew that you were going to do this? And I choose to believe, unless you married a psychopath, I choose to believe that your spouse did not set out to wound you in this way. I choose to believe that your spouse did and likely does still love you. That has nothing to do with the choice that they made to have an affair. Now, you might say, well, how can you love someone and be absolutely selfish? You're right. Listen, I have no defense of that. That is a valid statement. But what I think a lot of spouses think is that if my spouse cheated on me with somebody else, then they stopped loving me a long time ago. And that's not always the case. Sometimes, again, people are just selfish. And sometimes these reasons come up, and because we don't have the proper boundaries in our relationships, we find ourselves making horrific choices. Does it mean that something was wrong with your marriage? Perhaps not. Now, from the couples that I work with, it is very rare that someone has this incredible, amazing marriage and infidelity happens. No, we can usually go back and say, okay, there was a breakdown here. This is when it all fell apart. And so I would encourage you to start thinking about, when did it fall apart for us? It doesn't have to be some big thing. Sometimes it's just this, like, you know, when you're driving a car and it just kind of, you hear a little noise in the back and you're like, I hear that noise, and you just keep driving. You're not paying attention to it because it's not a big deal, right? And then what happens over time is that noise gets louder and louder and louder. One of my neighbors was just telling me the other day her engine blew up. And she had been hearing a noise in her car and really didn't pay much attention to it until the engine blew up. That's what happens a lot of times with infidelity. Your engine has blown up, your marriage has blown up, but there was likely some sort of indication along the way that maybe you didn't pay attention to, or maybe you belittled, or you didn't think that was a big deal, right? And so what happens is your marriage is probably broken at some point. That's not always the case, though. There are cases where the marriage itself is just fine, but the person who betrayed is not. This happens a lot of times when a spouse is dealing with depression, for example, or they're dealing with some sort of secret sin. Maybe they're really deeply entrenched in porn, or they've got a sexual addiction or something like that that has nothing to do with the marriage itself. It's just that person's issue. And then that person will go off and have an affair, leaving their spouse to wonder, what happened? I thought we were good. I thought our marriage was good. So there are times where, again, it's not always because there's problems in the marriage. Sometimes there's just problems with the person. Does that make it any easier? Not really. But I think it does at least alleviate some of the stress from the spouse asking questions like, was it my fault? Did I do something wrong? Was it something that I didn't do? And while we're on that topic, let me just say that if you are the spouse who was betrayed, it is not your fault. If no one has told you that, I'm telling you that it is not your fault. There is a difference between blame and responsibility. When we are responsible, and I teach this, I believe that everyone should be responsible for their choices. And I do believe, again, going back and seeing where did the marriage break down? How did I contribute to the breakdown of my marriage? That's not the same as blaming yourself for an affair. So you can take responsibility and say, I wasn't present. I didn't sleep with my spouse for 3 weeks or 4 months or whatever. I didn't meet his or her needs when they told me what their needs were. I can take responsibility for contributing to the breakdown of my marriage, but I do not have to take responsibility for my spouse's choice to have an affair. Please hear me on that. That is so important. Because if you are married to someone who does not take responsibility for their choices, what's going to happen is they're going to try to blame you. They're going to say it was your fault. You didn't do this. And if you would have done that, I wouldn't have had to go out and get my needs met in this way. If you would have met my needs, if you would have been more present, and you just need to reject that. There's a difference between blame and responsibility. So own what you need to own in the breakdown of the marriage, but do not accept blame for your spouse's affair. So now that we've talked about the common reasons, we've talked about, was the marriage broken before? Is that the reason that my spouse had an affair? Now we've got to talk about, what do I do now? So now the affair has happened. I wish I could take it back. I wish it never would have happened. I'm going to have to go through this horrific process. And my heart goes out to you because I've had to walk that process multiple times. And it is not an easy process. It hurts. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. And I'm just going to be real with you and let you know it's all of those things. This is not something that we can hide from. This is not something that we can just sweep under the rug and just, that was a little blimp in our marriage. Let's just keep going. No, remember, your engine blew up. So you can't drive your car anymore with a blown up engine. You're going to have to take that in to be serviced. So what do? Right now, number one is you need answers. Your spouse owes you the truth. And so I would encourage you to get the answers that you need. And maybe your spouse is willing to give those answers to you, and maybe they are not. Now, I don't recommend that you go become a private investigator, because I've done that. And let me tell you that a lot of the stuff that you're going to find is going to be more damaging and more hurtful than necessary. So the way that I would encourage you to approach this is to tell your spouse, listen, regardless of whether we mend this marriage or whether it dissolves, I still need the truth. I need to understand why this happened. And I would love for us to be able to have this conversation where you explain to me Where did this go wrong? How did we end up here? It is not wrong for you to want answers. And it is necessary because you know what? When we have answers, it helps us to find closure. And that doesn't always mean closure for the marriage per se, but it just helps us to move on. Having answers is an important process of healing. And if you're the unfaithful spouse and you're listening to me right now, I'm going to encourage you to be honest. Listen, your engine is already blown up. There's not a lot of things that can happen that's worse than that. So there's no need for lying at this point. There's no need for that. And you may be thinking, well, I don't want to tell my spouse the whole truth because it's going to be even more hurtful. No, what's going to be more hurtful is when they find out the truth and you didn't tell them. So be honest. Now, how much of the truth do you need? I don't think that you need the gory details. I really discourage spouses from getting into like the nitty gritties and the what kind of positions did you use and stuff like that. Like those images are hard to overcome. So I think you need to give relevant, pertinent information that's going to aid in the healing process. You need to give names. You need to give locations. You need to give how you met this person, how long the affair has happened. You need to give answers like that. But anything that's going to create any sort of mental pictures that are going to cause more harm, I would discourage doing that. So number one, you need answers. Number two, you need support. You cannot go through this alone. I know that there are so many people who just want to sweep it under the rug and they want to pretend that it didn't happen and they think that they don't need support. I'll just be able to get through this with time. Time does not heal anything. Time can be an accelerator in healing, but it does not heal. You need support. You need professional support. You need a counselor or a coach. You need somebody who knows what they're doing to walk you through this process. But you also need the support of your friends and family. So while I don't recommend that you tell your whole entire community, you do need to tell one or two trusted people, a best friend, a parent, a mentor, someone like that who's going to support you, someone who's going to allow you to be honest, someone who's going to be strong enough to handle your emotions because your emotions are about to be all over the place. And you need somebody who's strong enough to be able to support you in that. So do not go through this alone. Thirdly, you need a process. You need a process. Infidelity is not something that you find out about and you just work through it on your own and you end up healed. You need a process. There is a roadmap that you can go through to heal. And this is regardless of whether you stay or whether you leave your marriage. At the end of the day, you still need to be healed. And there's a process for healing. And that's what this podcast is about. That's what my upcoming course, Infidelity Intensive, is all about. And maybe you're thinking, well, what are my first steps? Like, this is so new to me. I'm so overwhelmed. I don't even know what first steps to take. I've got you covered. I have a free checklist that I'm going to share with you that's literally going to tell you these are the first steps that you need to take when you have found out that your spouse has been unfaithful. Listen, if I could take myself back years ago to when I first found out, your emotions are all over the place. You're raging, you're sad, you regret everything about your life, including the day that you married this person. Your emotions are all over the place. And then it's like, who do I tell? Can I trust this person? Do I tell my kids? Do I not? Do I move out? Do I tell him to move out or her to move out? Like, there's so many questions that are going through your mind right now. And I just want to bring you to a sense of peace. Not ultimate peace, because that's not realistic, but I want to bring you to a sense of peace that you're not alone in this, and there is a process that you can take to get through this. So I want you to go to danashay.com/affair checklist. When you go there, you're going to get my guide. It is going to literally guide you through what are some first next steps that I need to take right now. This is not the all inclusive, this is the path to healing. This is just, these are the first steps that I would recommend that you take when you find out that there's been infidelity. So again, you can get that guide at danashay.com. That's CHE.com/affair checklist. Well, I know that this is a heavy episode today, and I love to bring humor and lightness into all that I do, but sometimes there's just not a appropriate place to do that. So I hope that today's episode has given you a little bit more peace, that has let you know that some of the questions that you're asking are questions that everybody in this situation asks. So you are not defective. Can I just share that with you? You are not defective. There is someone listening to me right now who you're having that very thought. I'm defective. There's something wrong with me. Why do I keep attracting people who are unfaithful to me? There is nothing wrong with you. But we do need to get you some healing. And we need to figure out, if you are someone who keeps attracting people like this, why? So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that this has encouraged you. It maybe given you a little bit of peace, maybe helped you to start to process, what do I do now that I found out that this affair has happened in my relationship? Be sure to come back, because I'm going to have many more videos about this topic. And I want to encourage you to head over to my website. Again, I just gave you that free checklist, danashay.com/affair checklist. But be sure to head over to danashay.com, where you can learn more about my Rebuilding Us podcast and so many resources that I want to be able to gift to you as you walk through this journey of infidelity. I'll see you on the next video. Take care.